I've come out of hiding. I still exist. Ghost, why haven't we heard from you in so long? I applied to graduate school and I got in. Two things that I do not recommend you do. Bad idea, 0 out of 10. So yeah, I haven't really had much time for recording and editing videos, but I feel like this issue is timely and it deserves commentary. There is a lot that I feel like we could talk about on this channel in terms of what's happening in Palestine. We could talk about the national question, we could talk about the history of Zionism, but I want to concentrate today on a series of bad takes that I've heard, just garbage takes, sometimes from people who are obviously commenting in bad faith, and sometimes from well-meaning people who really should know better. So I have a list of 8 bad takes on Palestine. You can call them bad takes, you could call them, I guess, myths, you could call them tropes. I'm just going to use the term bad takes. The first bad take that I hear is that what is happening in Palestine is a fight over religion. That this is Jews versus Muslims, and some people might even say Jews versus Muslims versus Christians, or that the real culprit here is religion and we could solve the problem if everybody just became an atheist. There's a lot of reasons why this is just plain old-fashioned wrong and silly. First of all, because if we actually look at the different parties involved, the different sides of the conflict, it doesn't really line up well in terms of religion. Secular Jews have historically played a big role in Zionism, so not every Zionist Jew is necessarily basing that ideology off of, a spirituality or off of scripture. Lots of Arab and Muslim members of the ruling class, the governments of countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, are supporting Israel. They may not necessarily like what Israel is doing to Palestinians, but they still, at the end of the day, want to play ball with the Israeli capitalists and with the American capitalists who support the Israelis. Many Jews around the world, secular and religious, disapprove of Zionism. By the way, that includes Israeli Jews too. The Israeli working class are not fucking stupid. Just like the working class of pretty much every country on earth, many of them do support their government, and they have been subjected to large amounts of brainwashing, and many do have extremely politically backwards views, but there absolutely is a cohort of Israeli working class people who are opposing what their government is doing. And also, not all Palestinians are Muslim. Christians make up a pretty sizable minority of people in Palestine. It's just a bad analysis because it doesn't even actually correctly identify the players in the game. It doesn't even actually correctly identify who is where and who's doing what. Also, it's fucking racist. A lot of the bad takes that we're going to be talking about are racist, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic. It is. If to say, oh, they're just fighting over religion. I'm sorry, but that's bigoted. It's Islamophobic and it's anti-Semitic because you're basically saying that everybody who practices one of those religions is somehow inherently prone to behaving badly or causing conflict. A lot of leftists that I talk to are survivors of religious trauma, and a lot of them are strong atheists. And there's a very strong tendency I see among a lot of leftists to have just a general anti-religious sentiment, especially among leftists who are not very politically developed. They just have this opinion that religion in general is bad. And Marxism is atheistic in its essence. But to say that religion itself is the problem, it's a false consciousness. Yes, you have identified something that the ruling class is using to oppress people, but it's not the religion that is the problem itself. And you can make a good argument that, maybe we should take away one of the tools that the ruling class uses to oppress us. If religion is used as a tool of oppression, religion should go away. But in other terms, guns don't kill people, people kill people, but also maybe we shouldn't have so many guns around. But to say that religion itself is the problem, it's a false consciousness. And so when we talk about this issue as if it's the religions themselves are at conflict or the religions themselves are the source of the problem, it fails to hold the guilty parties accountable. It doesn't hold the Israeli ruling class accountable. It doesn't hold the American ruling class accountable. It doesn't put any accountability on NATO or Israel's Arab allies. And it ignores the billions of working class people all over the world who peacefully live in multicultural, multi-religious communities. Bad take number 2. People have been fighting over this patch of land for centuries. Well, guess what? Most patches of land on most of the planet have been the object of a conflict. People fought wars over Anatolia and Mesopotamia and the Indian subcontinent, over Central Europe and the Balkans, over, I don't know, not Antarctica. Nobody wants Antarctica. All sorts of people have been fighting over all sorts of land. Maybe you can argue that Palestine is uniquely positioned in its geography to make it more conflict prone, as it is perhaps a useful trade hub. But in the grand scheme of things, it really isn't special in that regard. The genocide that is happening now in Palestine, that is not the result of the Ottoman Empire or the Seljuk Turks or the First Crusades or the Roman expulsion of the Jews or the Babylonian exile, okay? Sure, you could argue that history set up the dominoes that are eventually falling, but again, that's true for any conflict that happens anywhere in the globe. Once again, this trope is extremely racist. It lumps a lot of different ethnic groups and political groups from all over time and space. It assumes that all Muslims or all Arabs are the same civilization, or that all Jews are the same civilization with the same interests and the same political agenda. It's racist because it ignores the millions of working class people who live in multicultural communities peacefully all over the world. And it basically is this narrative that somehow Middle Eastern people are inherently violent or inherently conflict prone. Which again, doesn't offer any kind of solution forward. And it also fails to hold the modern villains accountable. I don't think Pope Urban is responsible for what's happening in Palestine now. Okay, he wasn't a great guy, but I don't think this has anything to do with that time David gave King Saul the foreskins of 200 Philistines, all right? Yes, there has been conflict in this region for a long time, but this isn't the same continuous conflict that has always been happening. And also, the people of this region are not inherently more conflict prone than the people of other regions. Western Europe also has a long, long history of conflict, including religious conflict, okay? But how come we never hear that about Europe? How come nobody ever says, oh, people have been fighting wars in Europe over and over again for centuries and millennia? That's just how it is. When people talk about the causes of the Second World War, nobody thinks, oh, well, people have been fighting in Europe for centuries and centuries. Look at the Napoleonic Wars. Look at the Visigoths attacking the Romans. Look at the wars that happened in the wake of the Protestant Reformation as the Catholic Church was trying to wrest back control. Nobody ever says that about Europe. They do say it about the Middle East, but nobody ever says that Europeans or Catholics or Protestants are somehow uniquely conflict prone. Gee golly, I wonder why that double standard exists. Why do people blame Hitler for World War II, but when it comes to the genocide in Palestine, people say, well, that's just how the Middle East is. Bad take number 3. You realize Hamas is bad, right? Okay, and that doesn't make what Israel is doing any less of a genocide. Why is it that whenever people who are suffering oppression fight back, the obsession is always making sure they're fighting back in the correct way instead of holding the oppressors accountable? Yeah, Hamas is bad. I don't fucking care. If we don't want things like Hamas to exist on planet Earth, we have to take away the incentive for people to do things like join Hamas. We have to take away the oppression first. If we don't want people finding bad solutions to the problem, take away the problem. If we don't want people joining terrorist organizations in an effort to fight for national liberation, take away the need to fight for national liberation. The Israeli government bears the ultimate responsibility for every single crime Hamas has ever committed, because 1, the Israeli government actually actively and purposefully encouraged Hamas's rise to prominence, no joke, and 2, because the Israeli government is causing the violence and oppression that Hamas is trying to counteract. Cure the disease instead of bitching and moaning about the symptoms. Bad take number 4. Another bad take that I've seen is arguing that Palestinians are politically backward, that many Palestinians hold anti-LGBT sentiment, or that they're sexist or anti-Semitic, and therefore Palestinians don't deserve our support. In every community on Earth, working class people often hold politically backward ideas. They get these ideas from propaganda from the ruling class. Or these backwards ideas are holdovers from propaganda campaigns that the ruling class put forward generations before. But working class people don't lose their right to liberation just because they have politically backward ideas. The right to democratic national self-determination, the right to democratic control over the economy and the government, those are things that working class people are owed automatically. You don't have to be morally pure to deserve those things. There are lots of different reasons why reactionary and bigoted ideas might be popular among certain segments of the working class. And there's lots of different ways that leftist activists can counteract these ideas in a way that doesn't treat working class people who have these ideas as the enemy. And one of the best tools we have for fighting bigotry is the class struggle itself. Yeah, sure, maybe it is really popular among Palestinians to hold anti-LGBT or anti-Semitic views, but I don't fucking care, okay? That doesn't make it okay for the Israeli government to be bombing them to oblivion. It doesn't make it okay to take 2.3 million people and shove them into an open-air prison. And it doesn't make it okay to deny them the right to democratic national self-determination. And when it comes to progressive values, Israel isn't really that progressive either. Israel hasn't exactly legalized gay marriage. Now for this bad take, I don't actually often see the argument, oh, Palestinians are politically backwards, so you shouldn't support them. The argument is usually more along the lines that, oh, the left are hypocrites for supporting Palestinians because Palestinians are not woke enough for the left's actual standards. Why are the left supporting all of these people who are sexist and racist and homophobic? And the people making this argument are also usually themselves sexist, racist, and homophobic. This is almost never a good faith argument. It's usually a very poor attempt to have a gotcha moment to sort of trap the left in a perceived hypocrisy. And frankly, I think most leftists shouldn't pay much attention to the argument at all. Bad take number 5 is closely related. It's this idea that Arabs and Muslims in general are somehow inherently anti-Semitic. And so the idea is that Israel is justified in being hyper-defensive and hostile toward Arab communities around it. The idea is that Israel is justified in being this super strict Jewish-only ethno-state because somehow it's not possible for Jews to peacefully coexist with Arab communities around them. like I was explaining before, it is extremely common for people in working class communities to hold bigoted or reactionary ideas like anti-Semitism. But the solution to that problem isn't separating groups of people so that they're never forced to learn how to interact with each other peacefully. The solution is to combat those bigoted and reactionary ideas directly. And like I was saying, one of the best ways to do that is the class struggle itself. When people are working together and fighting for their common economic or political needs, there often isn't any time for bigotry, because the only way people can succeed in that fight is to form coalitions across demographics. And once again, this idea is just extremely racist because it assumes that Arabs and Muslims are somehow uniquely insular or uniquely ignorant. Of course, if there's any culture on Earth I would label as inherently anti-Semitic, I would say European Christianity. Muslims historically have treated Jews a lot better than Christians have treated Jews. But that doesn't really matter because working class people don't lose their rights just because they might have some politically backward views. It assumes that Arabs, including Palestinians, are stupid, that they lack access to education, or that they aren't tuned into struggles happening elsewhere in the world. And that is just absolutely not true. Bad take number 6. This is a bad take I've seen very specifically from Israeli Zionists that I have talked to online. And it's this idea that people who don't live in Israel or Palestine shouldn't comment on it. One of the absolute richest versions of this take that I've heard is an Israeli Zionist I've talked to who said something like, "Oh, well, if you think Israel is so bad, look at what your country has done, Miss America." He was trying to get me in some kind of hypocrisy trap when all he would have had to do was go through my public posts to see what an absolutely obnoxious communist I am. You want me to talk about the bad things America has done? My dude, Israel is one of the bad things America has done. My dude, you live in an American puppet state. Everything your government is doing, my government is funding it. It absolutely is my business. But even if that wasn't the case, just because you aren't directly affected by something, that doesn't mean it isn't your business. An injury to one is an injury to all. If working class people anywhere on the planet are suffering, it is my business. And yes, this guy's right. Since I'm not Israeli, I don't know what it's really like to be an Israeli. But I also don't know what it's like to be Palestinian either. And if you want me to listen to you and your perspective, you also have to admit that I also have to listen to Palestinians and their perspective too. It was just this very strange form of viewpoint epistemology that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Bad take number 7. I'm not sure you can really call this one a bad take, if that's the correct term, but I want to point out the language that corporate centrist liberal media is using, liberal and conservative media, referring to what's happening as the Israel-Palestine conflict or the Israel-Hamas war. And this isn't the worst bad take or bad perspective that I have on my list, but I do think it's a little bit annoying. At the end of the day, whatever is happening, we have to refer to it as something. But the terminology that is being used definitely has some bias behind it. Israel isn't trying to get rid of Hamas. I mean, they are trying to get rid of Hamas, but they're also trying to commit genocide against Palestinians. And to call it an Israel-Palestine conflict sort of frames it as, two people playing chess who are starting off with an equal number of pieces, when really, if they had equal pieces in the beginning, right now someone's playing with a full board, while the other side is playing with, just their king, plus a knight and a couple pawns. If that, calling it a conflict, while technically true, paints it as this sort of equivalent tit for tat that's going on, when that really is just not what's happening. Closely related to that is people talking about how they want peace, which is kind of a dumb thing to ask for, because what does peace even mean? I know there's a Martin Luther King quote somewhere on the tip of my tongue that explains this very issue, but, it's not enough just to have peace that's the absence of violence. You actually have to have liberation for the oppressed. I don't want peace if it means oppressed people have to put off their fight for liberation. I'm sorry, I don't. Bad take number 8. Talking about the issue as if it's complicated. It's really not fucking complicated. It's not. Pretending that it's complicated, all that does is shield the real villains from responsibility. It is extremely obvious to any person who has any ounce of compassion in their heart who the bad guys are in this situation. In my opinion, there is only one viable long-term solution to this problem. The Israeli state needs to be abolished. This doesn't necessarily mean enacting violence against working class people who live in Israel, but it does mean replacing the Israeli ethno-state with a secular, socialist, democratic state that recognizes the full and equal citizenship of all people born in the region, regardless of their religion or ethnicity, where all people are given freedom of movement within the country, freedom to engage in economic and political life, freedom of safety from violence, freedom to return to their ancestral family homes, and I 100% affirm the right of Palestinians to fight back, including through armed struggle. In Their Morals and Ours, Leon Trotsky, to paraphrase, writes that working class people have the right to use any means necessary in order to fight for their liberation. Of course, he includes the caveat that they should use only those means that are necessary. But if there is any situation in which armed struggle is justified and necessary, it is in the face of active genocide, which is what we're seeing. And yeah, I do care about the safety and well-being of working class Israelis too, but they will never truly be free or safe while living under an ethno-state government that so cynically and horrifically attempts to pit them against their neighbors. You may be watching all of these things unfold, and you may feel really helpless and scared and alone, but I want you to know that you are not alone. Whatever corner of the globe you are in, I promise there are comrades in your community. Whatever corner of the globe you're in, I can help you get in touch with comrades in that area, or at least comrades who can help you build up a fighting base in your area. And that includes Israel and Palestine. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you know what I'm going to ask you to do next. Find a socialist organization that is active in your area, join, become a dues-paying member, regularly attend their branch meetings, and participate in organizational activities. You are going to be in a much better position to understand what's happening, participate in the struggle, to know what tactics do and do not work if you're fighting as part of a collective. You do not have to sit back and watch helplessly in the face of these atrocities, and you do not have to fight alone. So if you're unsure about how to get involved, reach out to me either through Facebook or through my email. Facebook is probably a little bit better, but I can help you to get in touch with other comrades who are either in your area or at least nearby. Obviously, there are many things that we could talk about that we didn't get a chance to talk about in this video. I've provided some links in the description to some podcasts, to some articles that provide a Marxist perspective on the situation. I hope that by listing out these bad takes, these tropes, these myths, I've helped you to come to a slightly better understanding of the nature of what is happening in Palestine, and hopefully I've given you some counter-arguments or ideas of how you can push back against these bad takes when you encounter them out in the wild. So I hope that you found this video helpful or at the very least interesting. Obviously, yada yada yada, like, subscribe, share, you know how it goes. I love you, keep up the good fight, and thank you for listening.